Okay, good morning and welcome to Iyun with Benzion. Today's daf is Yevamos Pevav 86. Today we're going to be discussing the mitzvah of taking off Ma'aser Rishon. Ma'aser Rishon, just a little background, is basically when you have a finished pile of wheat and you smoothed it out and you made it into a pile, you're not chayav and take Trumas and Ma'aser. It's called Tevel now until you take off all the Trumas and Ma'aser. You have to take off Truma Gedola, which is Midaraisa, even one stalk of wheat, but Midarabanan they said 1/50th is recommended, 2% of your produce. Then you have to take off Ma'aser Rishon, which is another 10% after the first 2%, which leaves you, I guess, with 88%. And there's also a mitzvah to take off Trumas Ma'aser. That once the Levium get the Ma'aser Rishon, they have to take off 1/10 of whatever they got, and give that to the Kohanim. That's called Trumas Ma'aser. There's also something called Ma'aser Sheni, which is a second 10% you have to take off and bring to Yerushalayim and eat that produce at Yerushalayim. That's only during the third and the sixth year of the Shemitah cycle. During the first, second, and fourth and fifth year, you give that other 10th to Aniyim, Ma'aser Ani. We have a brisa on the Pevach and Olive that says, Rabbi Yossi says, that if you fail to take off any of these things, even if you took off everything except Ma'aser Ani or except Ma'aser Sheni, you fail to take off even one of these things, it's still called Tevel. And it says, Lo sucha lechel b'sharech, you're not allowed to eat it. It's still called Tevel, and there's a lav in the Torah that you're not allowed to eat that produce until you take off all of the things that you need to take off, all donations that you need to take off. Now, the Gemara adds one thing, and the Gemara says that first of all, we know even Ma'aser Ani makes something Tevel. And then it says, and how do you know that if you don't take off, seemingly the Gemara is saying Ma'aser Rishon, you also get Misa B'dei Shamayim. Not only do you get a lav, potentially get Malchus, but you also get Misa B'dei Shamayim, which is a very severe punishment for eating that produce. And the Gemara says that's because in the pasuk it refers to Ma'aser Rishon and compares it to Truma. It's like Truma, you eat Truma, you're a Zar, you're Yisrael, you eat Truma, you're not allowed to eat Truma, you're Yisrael, you get Misa B'dei Shamayim. So too, by Ma'aser Rishon, you get Misa B'dei Shamayim, if you didn't take off Ma'aser Rishon. Now the article extends that, and it says, basically the Gemara is extending that not just Ma'aser Rishon, but even if you eat Tevel with just Ma'aser Ani, not separated from it, you'd also get Misa B'dei Shamayim. It's not clear like that from the Gemara, especially from the Ika Amri and the Gemara. The Gemara says, in the middle of Pevav and Aleph, the Gemara says, V'ima hasna hava mina lishna achrina, Ma'aser Rishon the Tavel M'Rabbi Yossi nafka. Right? The fact that Ma'aser Rishon makes a pile Tevel, we know from Yossi's drush, I just mentioned before. Why do you need a second pasuk that compares Ma'aser to Truma? Ima hi hava mina lalav, al misa lo kamash malan. Therefore, it compares, and that pasuk is talking about where Ma'aser Rishon is compared to Truma. Therefore, you get Misa B'dei Shamayim if you eat Ma'aser Rishon when it was still in the produce. You haven't taken it off. Now, article extends to even Ma'aser Ani, but I want to say that Pashup Shah in the Gemara is that it's talking about only Ma'aser Rishon. Now, why is Ma'aser Rishon different than Ma'aser Ani? The difference is that Ma'aser Rishon has another Truma, it's another Ma'aser min Ma'aser. You have to take off 1/10 and give that to the Kohen. Ma'aser Rishon, you're not allowed to eat right away. You'll have to take off. It's still Tevel until you take off Truma's Ma'aser, 1/10 of the 1/10 that you got, and give that to Kohanim. So therefore, it has a little bit of Truma in it. Ma'aser Ani, there's no chiyuv to take off Trumas Ma'aser Ani. There's no Trumas Ma'aser Ani, but there is Trumas Ma'aser Rishon. So therefore, that's all the Gemara is meaning to say. By the mitzvah, by Truma Gedola, and Trumas Ma'aser, it's for sure there's a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah over there? The mitzvah, whether it's two mitzvahs, a hafrasha and a nesina to the Kohen, or it's just one mitzvah, a hafrasha, or it's the same thing, the hafrasha and the nesina. Whatever logic, we'll have to talk about that at a different time. Two mitzvahs, one mitzvah, no sekilim talk about. The Rambam says one thing, other Ravid says maybe a different thing. I remember this from my shiurim. I heard from my Yonasan Sachs when I was like 20 years old. He used to talk about this a lot. Is this mitzvah truma? Two mitzvahs, one mitzvah, Rambam, Ravid, whatever it is. What about Ma'aser Rishon? Is there a mitzvah to give Ma'aser Rishon to take off? I want to suggest that no, there's no mitzvah to take off Ma'aser Rishon. The reason you're supposed to take off Ma'aser Ani is that you're not violate a lav. I don't know if you get Malchus. If you eat Tevel that just has Ma'aser Ani left, and it says Lo Sucha Lecha B'Sharecha, you're not able to eat it B'Sharecha. It doesn't say Lo Sochal. If it says Lo Sochal, That means alav sheish bo ma'isa. The eating is alav sheish bo ma'isa. Lo suchal b'sharecha, you're not allowed to. You're not able to. The little translation, you're not able to eat it b'sharecha. It sounds like it's alav sheish bo ma'isa. You wouldn't get malchus for it. So the mitzvah to take off truma and the mitzvah to take off truma's ma'aser is to save you from a punishment. And that's part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to spare you a punishment. Therefore, you take a truma's ma'aser from the ma'aser rishon. And even if you have tevel, it just doesn't have ma'aser rishon, it's problematic not because of the ma'aser rishon, but because the truma's ma'aser that still has to be taken off ma'aser rishon. So still truma, mitzvah of truma. That's why he gave me to the shamayim, not because of the ma'aser rishon. Tevel, ma'aser rishon doesn't make something tevel to be chayiv misa, only because it has truma's ma'aser, and that's why it makes you chayiv misa. B'dei shamayim, and therefore there's no mitzvah to take off ma'aser rishon. And this will help explain a difficulty that the commentators ask on Amud Beis, Pevav Amud Beis, where we find out it's machlokes between Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva. Midoraisa, can Kohanim collect Ma'aser Rishon? According to Rabbi Akiva, it's dafka only given to Levim, Midoraisa. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was a Kohen himself, he said that, I'm not saying he gave the psak based on his own situation, but he paskin technically, Ma'aser Rishon could be given to either Levim or to Kohanim. Now we find out that in Ezra, when they came up from Bavel to build the second Beis Hamikdash, Levim didn't come. So they were penalized. They made it takana, according to everybody, it says in the Gemara, that they lose out on Ma'aser Rishon. They lose out on Ma'aser Rishon. Either you give it to the Aniyim or you give it to the Kohanim, so they could eat it when they made Tumas and when they can't eat Truma because they're tummy. Ma'aser Rishon don't allowed to be eaten when you're tummy. So they ask, according to the Maskana of the Gemara, that they made a knas, and according to Rabbi Akiva, who held, I believe we paskin like that, Midoraisa, you can only give it to the Levim. How could they make a knas and take it away from the Levim and give it exclusively to the Kohanim? But according to Elazar ben Azariah, it was supposed to be given both to the Levim. You could give Makayim the mitzvah of Ma'aser Rishon, if there is a mitzvah, to give it to the Levim or the Kohanim. So they took away Levim. But you can still be Mekayim and Mitzvah, Ma'aser Rishon, by giving it to the Kohanim. But according to Rabbi Akiva, the Mitzvah was only to the Levim, and they eradicated that. So technically, in terms of the Mammon, right, the money Ma'aser Rishon belongs to the Levim. So we know, the Ritva explains, Hefker based on Hefker. They can remove the money, it was Mammon Levim, and they gave it to other people, to the Aniyim, or they gave it to the Kohanim. They were able to do that, Hefker based on Hefker. You're allowed to uproot someone's money and give it to somebody else. But if it's a mitzvah to give Ma'aser Rishon, how could they oker the mitzvah? The mitzvah d'oraisa is to give the Levim, and now they said give it to Aniyim or give it to the Kohanim, Aniyim Yisraelim, or give it to Kohanim. That's not something that was part of the mitzvah. It's not Akira's davar b'shei v'altasa. It's not they just said don't do the mitzvah of giving Ma'aser. They changed the mitzvah of Ma'aser. You give it to somebody else. That's a problem. You can't do that. It's kum ve'eseh. We don't do that unless it's a very big inyan like Har Carmel, Eliyahu Hanavi. So how could they do that? So if you answer no, there's no mitzvah to give Ma'aser Rishon. Ma'aser Rishon is only because of the Truma's Ma'aser, so therefore that makes it a mitzvah, and that makes it a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. There's no mitzvah to give Ma'aser Rishon to Levim, so therefore you're only dealing with a dinei mameh shayla of who does it belong to? It belongs to Mamo and Levim, so you're giving it to Kohanim, you're giving it to Aniyim Yisraelim, but if there's no mitzvah, they're not okar mitzvah min Torah. And the whole mitzvah, I say, is only based on take away a punishment. There's no punishment by regular Ma'aser Rishon as long as you took out Shumas Ma'aser. I hope you enjoyed today's share. See you tomorrow.